we're ready to go. So thank you everybody for joining in here today. In the next 45 minutes to an hour, we're going to be talking a little bit about how learn-on-demand systems are actually deploying labs at events. Whether it's a small event or it's a large event, we're going to be talking about how that is actually done. It's a topic that Quinn, who's joining me here today, we were talking about quite a while ago because we're getting a lot of questions asked. We just show up on site, attendees sit down in front of computers and they're doing labs, but the amount of work that actually goes into executing something like that is something that we want to talk about here today. In just the last 6 months, we've actually done almost 20 events on site. Not just here in the US, but actually around the world. Right now, as we're standing here talking, we actually have an event happening in Copenhagen. Just a couple of days earlier this week, it was in England, and last week we had events in...
It was Milan, and Birmingham, London.
Milan, Singapore, South Africa. We've done a lot of events in the last 6 months here. So we thought it would be interesting to actually have a little chat about what is it we're actually doing, because a big part of what we're doing is, of course, deploying virtual machines. But before we even get to that stage, there's quite a lot of things that goes into that. So first of all, when we go on site, what we're really looking at is the attendee experience. We really want to make sure that anybody who's going into this event, sitting down and doing a lab, whether it's in a room, it could be anywhere in a conference center, in a hotel, we want to make sure that those attendees actually have a good experience. And in order to achieve that, there's a lot of things that's happening before an event. We have, it could be 2 months of planning, it could be a year of planning. It really depends on the type of event. First of all, when we sit down with the customers to find out what type of experience is it they actually want, we normally take the lab experience and divide it into 3 different categories. We have what we call the traditional hands-on lab. With the traditional hands-on lab, it's normally a room. It could have 50 computers in it. It could have 1,200 computers in it. It really depends on the size of the event. But any attendees can show up, sit down at a computer, and they can do any of the labs available. And we normally have quite a large number of labs available. I think we normally look at somewhere between 150 to 250 labs that the attendees can consume during that event. We also do what's called instructor-led labs. And with the instructor-led labs, they are scheduled sessions. Normally, they're about 60 to 75 minutes in length. And in those sessions, there are also presenters. Some sessions will have 1 presenter. We have sessions that might have 5 presenters. It really depends on the topic. But an attendee can go into one of those sessions. They sit down. They engage with the instructors, presenters. They support people in the room. And then they go through the hands-on lab components during that session as well. The last type of lab experiences we normally talk about is what's called workshops. Those workshops is normally when somebody is attending an event and that event is running over a number of days, but they're actually sitting in front of a computer and they're switching between presentations and labs. So it's more a classroom style environment. It's normally smaller numbers of users. Normally we are looking at maybe up to maximum 100, 150 users and something like that.
It's usually a smaller set of labs too. It's like 5, 10 labs.
So they might only be doing like 5, 10 labs within that workshop itself. And they're normally fairly long labs. Hands-on labs, instructor-led labs, we normally recommend keeping them at like 45 to 60 minutes in length. If they start becoming longer than that, quite often we see that people don't actually have time to finish them. So keeping the labs shorter, focused on just one topic is normally the best end result. Workshops, however, the labs are normally building on top of each other. They can be very long labs. Attendees could be sitting there for 10 hours a day actually working on those labs. But a lot of things are actually happening before we get on site to do an event like that. Months of planning goes into this, from logistics to staffing, content management, on-site management, and a lot of things is happening after the event is over as well. And we're going to talk a little bit about each one of those areas. Quinn's main focus is really the content management. So he engaged with all the content owners, making sure all their content gets handed off, provisioned. And I kind of take care of all the logistics, the staffing, on-site management, and so a lot of things goes into each one of those areas. So just talking about logistics. When we are doing an on-site event, if we are talking about a large-scale event with, like, let's say 20,000 attendees, that planning normally starts about a year in advance. We have to go look at the space. We have to figure out what is the best way that we can utilize the space we have to give the attendees that learning experience that they actually are looking for. We're looking at hardware allocations, just getting 600 computers provisioned, set up. There's a lot of planning going into that. How do we actually achieve that in the time we have to load in? An event might start on Monday. We might not move in till Friday. So a lot of things have to happen in that short period of time. There is platform integrations happening. That is normally months of planning up front. We'll talk a little bit more about the platform integrations a little bit later on. But there's really a lot of things happening in the phase leading up to the event itself. Staffing is one of those cool areas I really like, because depending on the size of event, we could have anywhere from 2 people on site to maybe 100 or more on site. We've had events where we've actually had almost 200 people on site. So any given event, that number will change. How we are finding staff for all of this, we normally use Microsoft certified trainers. So these are trainers that are normally standing in classrooms teaching every single week. And we actually take those trainers, we engage with them, we bring them on site. And that way we're really ensuring that the attendees get the experience that they need to have a successful lab experience. The MCTs are also the subject matter experts, so they know the different topics that attendees will be going through. The staff will be going through all the labs up front. Quinn works with all of these people to make sure, hey, everybody has gone through all of these different labs. We know who knows the different topics. And then we are bringing in all of these people on site to support the event. So 6 months before an event normally starts, we actually engaging with all of these people to make sure they're available, that they're ready to go on site and support the event. And of course, Quinn's favorite topic here is the content management. Quinn loves content management. He deals with the content owners from early on in the stages. It's normally one of the work streams, as we call it, that starts very early on because it is a huge process. If we have 250 labs, how much data is that?
15 terabytes?
10, 15 terabytes of virtual machines that's actually being used in an event. All of this content comes from what we call content owners. So the customer that we are doing the event for will normally hand off that. Quite often, there's a large number of content owners.
Yeah, I think for Check Ready this year, we had almost 200. 200
content owners for one of the larger events that we just did. So Quinn is actually engaging with all of these content owners. He has regular meetings with them, lots of email communications, 4,000 or 5,000 emails sometimes before an event is over. So Quinn is not only the master of content, but he's actually also the master of email. Because he's actually reading all of those emails, he is responding to all the emails, and dealing with all the requests. Do you want to talk a little bit about the content process,
yeah, sure.
The different areas?
So the first thing we do is we want to work with whoever's running the event to identify what labs are going to be suitable for the audience that's going to go to that event. So we work with them to figure out any content that we want to reuse from a previous event and any new content they want to have for the event. And then we look at how many labs there's going to be, how many content owners there are, and we establish some sort of handoff schedule with some key milestone dates that we have to hit to make sure that we're ready on time. We have to get a list of all the content owners. We have to reach out to the content owners and let them know the handoff process, how they get the labs to us. We have to make sure that we get the content actually handed off, loaded into the system, and then give the content owners access to test to see if there's any things they need to fix. We work with them to make sure that we can get any fixes in place. We also have our own QA process for a lot of the events where we take these TLGs and MCTs that Kim was talking about, and they go through the labs. They do it end to end as a user does, and they try and see if the steps work. And if they do work, awesome, we deploy the lab. If they don't, then we go back to the content owner and we say, hey, we found these issues in your lab, and we work for a resolution. Sometimes you might go back and forth 10 or 15 times with one specific content owner, and then when you multiply that times 100 or 200 content owners, it gets pretty hectic. There's a lot that goes on.
Yeah, but the end result here really is we want to make sure once that content is deployed at the event, we want to make sure those attendees get a really good learning experience. And quite often when our team goes in and does this Q&A, it's not just to see does the steps actually work. We actually want to make sure, is it the best possible way to do it? Is there any ways that the steps could be optimized, could be changed to actually provide the user with a better learning experience?
And that's, again, where the MCTs come into play, because most of them are presenters. So they can look at someone's content that might be written by a developer and go, well, this format is horrible to present to someone to do this lab, and they'll come back with a bunch of suggested steps on how to actually make the content presentable to the end user, as opposed to the person who wrote the lab may not have ever written a lab before. So the steps might be, a lot of expected knowledge, a lot of missing steps that they, implied knowledge that they think the user should just know, instead of, going through things in detail. And the MCTs can actually point that out and help make a better product, a better lab for the end user.
Exactly, yeah. So LODS goes into that QA process. The QA process normally takes quite a long time. And during that process, we're in constant contact with the content owners. The content owners might go in and update their content. They might hand off new content. And for all of this, we're using a couple of different tools to actually track all of this in. So a lot of you is probably familiar with our Lab on Demand platform, but it's really in the Lab on Demand platform where we are tracking and managing everything that we are doing for the conference. So we are looking at evaluations. We are looking at the event setup itself. All the virtual machines is managed from within this platform as well. And I don't know if you want to talk a little bit to some of the things in the platform itself.
Yeah, so people that have used LOD or lab developers probably have never seen this before, but this is the tool that I use to keep track of the content as it's being handed off. In some cases, this list of labs you're seeing here will be populated via some sort of API or integration with whoever's running the event. In some cases, we go in and we add all these lab profiles manually, and then you can see there's a little bit of information about the number, the title, the platform that it's running on. So at a glance, you know how many labs might be running on Hyper-V for an event, how many labs are running on VMware for an event. We can track the manual status and the actual development status, and that's kind of a little bit of two different things. We'll talk about that in a second. We can control the availability of the lab, so whether or not it's seen on the floor at the event, or whether it's hidden, or whether it's canceled. And then we can go in and do some tagging so that when people go to the event page, they're easily able to find a lab that falls in whatever subject matter they're looking for, or product they're looking for. Right here is kind of our little lab status that we use. So the manual status would be, the manual has been handed off to me. It's been QA'd. We would set that to ready for. So the manual would be handed off. We'd set it to ready for verification. Once the lab is actually QA'd, it's either passed or failed, and there's the changes right there that we can set. We also have passed with changes, so that would be the MCT comes back and says this lab should have these steps added. So I just went ahead and put these in there. They changed a little bit of wording, some minor things that we don't need to go back to the content owner to have them change, but we send them back the manual and we say, hey, look, this is what the MCT did. They passed your lab, but they added some stuff to it. So this is basically how we track the manual, which is a little different than what we call the content or the VMs. The biggest thing that we're concerned with as we get closer to an event and we have our build-up happening is we want the VMs handed off. That's the biggest thing. That's the biggest bulk amount of data that we have to get given to us. We need to get that prepped and loaded. So we track that separately than the manual, because sometimes the manual we can get a little later in the process. So we have some development statuses here. Launchable means it's available. People can go launch the lab. Launchable kiosk only, it's a little edge case scenario where we might have a locked down machine someplace in the event that only runs one specific lab, and that's it. There's nothing else available on that machine. We can set it temporarily unavailable. So we might be at an event, and it might be an Azure lab, and there's a change in the Azure UI that happened the night before the event, and it breaks a lab. We have to get it fixed. We don't want to cancel it, but we want to just temporarily pull it off the floor. So we set it to that, and it actually lets the attendee know that this lab's temporarily unavailable, so they'll know it'll be back soon. We can set it to hidden. That's one of those, we think we're going to fix it, might not be able to. Let's just go ahead and hide it so people don't ask questions about it. We can mark it as canceled by owner, which should be, the owner said can't fix it, whatever reason they wanted to cancel it. And then we have cancel an external system, which is kind of the same thing. And then bare metal, that would be for labs at events where people actually have built a lab that requires people to actually access the physical host. It's something we see less and less of now that we can support nested virtualization on Hyper-V, but there's a lot of labs where people needed access to the hypervisor, and we would actually have a subset of machines at an event where they can go access those. So it's just a way for us to track it.
Yeah, we used to do a lot of those bare metal labs, and they take a lot of time to set up as well. It's also normally different hardware we have to bring in for those.
Yeah.
It could be physical phones, it could be external devices that is needed for those.
We had one event where we had phones and Raspberry Pis and Surfaces all connected, and it was one real cool setup.
Exactly, yeah. So, and what these statuses really just tells us is what is available to the attendees, how can they actually go access it. It used to be that at events, labs were available from within the conference center or the room itself, and that was the only place you could access labs. Now everything is virtual. So yeah, we might have people going on site to the event, but there might also be people that are sitting at the other end of the convention center or back at their hotel for some reason, and in that case, they can still access the labs today. We actually see the number of people accessing labs virtually is actually increasing. So instead of going to this one room in the convention center, they can use their own laptops. They can sit anywhere in a convention center, and they're actually able to access the labs that way. So I think last event we were tracking this at was about 20% of all people were actually outside of the room where the labs are actually taking place.
It gives them the option of attending more in-person sessions at the event and then doing the labs in their own time as being forced to have them do them at the actual event.
Yeah.
Phyllis, you asked a question about MCTs. Yes, we can host events that are not from Microsoft events, and we can use SMEs that we can go find ourselves, or if the content owner or whoever we're working with has a recommended group of SMEs or one in particular, we would reach out to them and have them involved in the QA process. So we say MCTs because Kim and I really live in the Microsoft world, but yes, we have the ability to do this for anyone's product for the most part.
Yeah, and we do that for other events as well.
We did OSCON last year, which wasn't a Microsoft event, but we kind of helped Microsoft with that, and they had people QA the labs that weren't MCTs. So.
Exactly, yeah. So yeah, and the other thing that Quinn was briefly talking on the screen that we were showing just earlier is the tagging of labs. And that's really important for us as well, because we want people to be able to find those labs. So when they're sitting down at a computer and they are locking onto what we call our event platform, and we'll show you that in just a few minutes, they're presented with this very long list of like 200 labs. They want to be able to easily find it. I want to do a lab on Skype for Business. I want to do a lab on IoT. So there's a lot of different ways that they can find those labs, and tagging is one of those critical ways that they can do it. This is one of those things where our integration with the content CRM system. So the customer has their CRM systems that they're running their event on, and we're actually quite often integrating with those. So all of this information we get directly from their system. If we don't get it from their system, then it's normally Quinn and his team who is sitting down and manually doing all of this tagging. What is the audience? What topic is the lab on, the level, the product. So we're going to figure out what type of tags do we actually want people to search for. If it's an international event, for example, we might want to have a language tag so they can find labs that are English, Japanese, German, whatever it might be. So this changes for every single event that we are doing. Anything else in here that's worth pointing out, Quinn? Actually, there's one thing I do want to point out, because that's one thing that a lot of people don't think about. And I'm just trying to zoom in here. And that's actually the memory of the labs. Yeah. We have this lab there that's using 32 gig of memory. That might not sound like a lot, but when you multiply it with just one instructor-led lab with 100 people in, that's 300
terabytes.
That's 320 gig of, sorry, 3.2 terabytes of gigs right there. And that's just one room. If we have 3 ILL rooms and 4 ILL rooms, we have a 500-seat hands-on lab. Suddenly we're looking at actually using 15, 20 terabytes of hosting capacity. That's running either out of one of our data centers, or we're using Azure for it. There's lots of different ways we can do this.
And just to clarify, that's RAM that he's talking about, folks.
Yeah.
That's actual memory, so that's not disk space. So that's actual RAM that
Yeah,
requires.
so disk space, we normally look at, you set 10, 15 terabytes for an event. And just getting all of that content handed off, transferred to the data centers, transferred to Azure, that is a very time-consuming process as well. Now, one of the other things, and we've talked about this just a little bit, is the actual platform itself. So one of the features we have on our Lab on Demand, and most people that use it to develop their labs would never actually see this, but we do have, I need to zoom back out here, we do have our Lab on Demand event platform. And I'm just zooming in here so everybody can see it. This is actually where the attendees will access the labs from. They don't log on to our training management system. It's not just a regular web page, but it's actually this event-specific page that we normally customize for each individual event. In this case here, we're actually looking at the one we used for the last Microsoft Ignite. And you can see the tags and the filters we were just talking about is actually located over on the left. And then in this case here, we have 163 labs available. So any attendee can sit down, scroll through this list, search for information, and they'll be able to launch the lab from there. One of the things that we are always doing is tracking what attendees are doing. And there's different levels of tracking we can do. In some events, people will just sit down in front of the computer, see this screen here, launch a lab. At other events, we might want people to actually log on. We want them to log on for a couple of different reasons. Maybe it's a requirement that the evaluation is being associated with a user. So the customer can actually follow up based on feedback we're getting. Our platform also supports what's called gamification, something that is hugely popular. Essentially setting up a fun environment for users to do labs and win prizes. You know, you do the most labs on day one, you win something, you get points for it.
People love it.
People love it, yeah.
Love it, yeah.
And we have a lot of these different types of evaluations, achievements that they can actually get. Submit an evaluation. Failure, find something that they believe is a bug within a lab. Failure proof, take the high availability lab. So for every event, we're actually customizing this as well. And people really love this.
Yeah, they do.
It's all about coming up on what we call the leaderboard. So their name will actually show up that, hey, they achieved the most points. And we actually see people doing labs, completing labs, just because of these different things. Also during this event, what else are we doing? We're tracking what users are doing inside the labs. So we know exactly what labs people are doing, how much time they're spending in it. We look at evaluation feedback. So we actually have people who sit down and looks at every single evaluation that's submitted. Is somebody saying that, oh, the lab didn't work, or I couldn't really figure out how to do it? Quinn's content team actually goes back, looks at those labs and say, okay, did the user click on the wrong VM? Or did they miss a step? Or is there actually something missing in the lab manual or inside the VM? Or is it just not clear enough what they're actually supposed to be doing? So we're actually constantly looking at this during the event. And the content team will actually go in and update those labs, tweak the labs, reach out to the owners of the labs and say, hey, this is the feedback we're getting. And there's different ways that people can submit those types of requests of feedback to us. There's the evaluation at the end, but then our system also have what we call the bug reporting capability. So when you're actually inside the lab interface doing a lab, you have the option to submit feedback. And that feedback is actually something we're collecting in what we call our bug reporting tool. Quite often, it's not bugs people are reporting, but it might just be feedback. Oh, I just did this lab, but it would be really nice if it had also covered a particular topic. And sometimes we do get bug reports as well. So Quinn, do you want to talk a little bit about this tool, how we're using it?
Yeah, so basically it's something we can enable on a lab or not have enabled on a lab. It's up to the content owner or the event. And basically, as someone's going through their lab, there's a little option, they can submit a bug. If it's an IDL or an integrated digital lab, it'll actually, the system knows what step they were on, and it'll submit the bug and show that step, and then it can actually take a screenshot of what they're seeing as well, so that when we come behind them and look at the bug report, we can pretty much have a good idea of what they're looking at, and we know where to go right in the manual and try and see, was it a misstep or is there something that's actually broken in there. We can track it. We have, we can say fix in progress. We can say that it's an unconfirmed report. We can put different priority levels on it as well. The urgency of us needing to go back and fix it. We can, as you guys can see on the screen here, the steps to reduce the problem, the attendee can put those in there. The screenshot was automatically generated, so we can see that in this lab, Windows is actually expired and the attendee cannot do what they need to do. So this is a valid issue that we need to go look at, and it's actually set to fix in progress, so the content team is looking at it. But
yeah. Yeah, so in this case here, this bug report for this particular lab we're looking at actually goes directly to the content owner.
Correct.
So the content owner actually gets an email saying, hey, somebody has reported an issue for your lab. And they will actually go look at it. In some cases, they will be able to go in and fix it themselves.
Correct. Depending on who the content owner is, and if they're an actual LOD lab developer, they can have the ability to go in and fix it themselves, or we have to go to them and say, hey, look, this bug's been reported in your lab. How do you want to deal with it? And then we have the back and forth until it's resolved.
So a lot goes into the content side of things. So this user interface is totally customizable. It can be branded. It can be changed, the look and feel of it. And then, as I mentioned, we have this authentication on top of it. Different ways we do authentication. Do you want Microsoft authentication? Do you want Google authentication? Active Directory integrated authentication? Quite often, it actually ties into the event system. So not only are we authenticating the user, but we're also making sure, hey, you are actually attending that event as well. And that way, it can actually be tracked to the back end. Users might be able to go to their event profile and see, okay, I did all of these labs. So we have all of that tracking built in, all of that authentication. So we're very closely tied into a lot of those systems. The evaluation systems as well is something that we are tied into. And configuring evaluations, it's something that we're spending quite a lot of time on upfront as well. What type of questions should we ask? Is it a text question? Is it a rating scale? So a lot of things actually goes into just looking at how do we do these type of evaluations.
And this is fully customizable, so we can change the red to green we leave, but we can change what kind of questions, like Kim said, we're asking, the amount of radio buttons, whether it's a text field, whether they actually have to submit an evaluation before they can exit the lab environment. So that's something important. Some events, they give them the option of doing an evaluation. Some, they have to submit it before they can exit the lab. And in order to launch another lab, they have to have had exit that one lab. So it's forcing them to actually put data in there.
Exactly, yeah. So we get really good feedback, and we are constantly analyzing that feedback, figuring, okay, what's going on, what type of verbal feedback did they give us, is there anything, please provide any additional comments, did the lab meet your expectation? One of the things that we actually spent time on before the event is actually reading the titles and abstracts that we were given. Do they actually match what they're actually doing in the lab manual? Quite often, we get the titles and abstracts like 6 months before the event, but we get the content 2 months before the event. So the content owner couldn't actually develop what they originally wanted, so now there's suddenly a disconnect. Yep. And when we see that disconnect, it's quite often the evaluation scores. Why is it scoring a 2 out of a 5? And we start digging down to that, and it's a simple thing as the description is wrong. So Quinn is really focused on the entire content side of things. And once we get on site, sorry, Quinn, I had to do this. Quinn is really happy when we got on site, because at that point, his 3 months of dealing with 15 terabytes of labs, dealing with getting all of these preps tested, get everything ready, you know, once he's on site, it's sort of, okay, now we are moving over to the next stage where we're on site. So now it's sort of into the attendee mode. Let's make sure those attendees are actually getting a good experience. You know, if there are labs that are not performing, if we can't fix those labs for whatever reason, might be a changing issue, we remove those labs, because we don't want attendees to sit and go through something that we know will not give them a good experience. So as you can see here, Quinn is really happy once we get on site. And just because we are on site, the process doesn't stop. We are still working on content. You know, we get content handed off during the event.
Yep. We work on content. If it's a 5-day event running Monday through Friday, we pretty much work on content up through Thursday. And at that point, if it's still broken, we pretty much get the content owners to hide it, and we'll get it fixed for on-demand access afterwards. But
yeah, and that's a really good point that Quinn said there, because on-demand access, for most events that we're doing today, anyone who attended that event will actually be able to get that content, consume that content online as well. So it's through the event website, it could be through something we're setting up, but they will actually be able to go online, log on, and access any of those labs at any time. And quite often that post-consumption of labs might actually be more than what was actually consumed on site. The event we're doing in Copenhagen today is a 2-day event. There's thousands of people, but they only have 2 days to do everything in. So a lot of people will do labs there, but even more people will actually consume those labs after the event is over. So it's an interesting thing. People really like that virtual lab access. And as we talked about a little bit earlier on, we really go in and monitor the evaluations, monitor the bug reporting, making sure that everything is working. And then once we also get on site, it can be a little bit overwhelming. You've done all of this work up front. You walk into this huge room where you see all of these computers, and you're like, we're never going to fill up this big space with people, and suddenly there's actually lineups.
We do, yeah.
People really love labs. So we are normally very busy on site. And we can do these labs in a lot of different places on site.
We've been in the meal hall before.
We've been in the meal hall. In Birmingham, earlier this week, they were in like an igloo bubble of some sort.
In Prague, they took the 5-star restaurant at the hotel that we were staying at and turned that into the hands-on lab area. It's the first time I've ever actually been someplace where there was a barista working behind a bar in the hands-on lab area that was making cappuccinos for people on demand. So that was an interesting one.
Yeah, we did one where the lab was actually in a tent outside on a lawn beside a pool once. So there's really lots of different places. As long as there's internet, as long as there's power, and people can sit down in front of a computer, they will come and sit down.
We even had an event where they brought the lawn and set up trees inside so that it felt like you were outside at the event.
That is true, yeah. We did have the garden inside with the trees.
live birds flying around the trees.
The live birds flying around inside, yeah, I remember that. So yeah. So it's really an interesting environment to be in, and users do continue consume those labs. I just went and looked at actually this morning here. You know, in the last 6 months for those events that we've done on site, 24,000 lab launches is actually what we've been doing. So it's almost 35,000 hours of labs that people have been consuming in just the last 6 months for these type of events. So we spend a lot of time analyzing all the data that we are collecting. How much of a lab did users complete? Did they go to the end? Did they complete 100%? Did they complete 80%? It's actually one of the things that Quinn is looking at, or his team is looking at during the event. Why is everyone stopping at 80% in this lab? Is there something wrong at this step? That's actually something we can track. We analyze it, we see if it's something that we need to fix.
We dig in the bug reports and see if there's some bug reports about that lab. So, you know, it gives us a place to go start looking at. So.
Yeah, and there's a really important thing that we didn't actually cover here. We have another integration that we're using a lot. Azure
Yeah,
Office 365. You want to talk about it?
Yeah, so we have the the ability to integrate the distribution of Azure passes or Office 365 credentials right within the lab interface. It's really nice. So the user launches a lab, they need an Azure pass, boom, they get one right up in the upper right-hand corner of the lab interface. They take that pass, there'll be steps in the instructions that tell them to go to MicrosoftAzurePass.com and go redeem it, and now bam, they have a $50 or $100 or whatever the content owners decided, or the event owners decided, they have an Azure account to go try this lab with. We can do the same with an Office 365 account. We have some other parameters around it where I can say, I want the same credentials to be distributed to the same attendee for the duration of an event. So if I attend a class this week that runs Monday through Friday and it's a Skype class, and I need Office 365 credentials, no matter how many times I launch that lab, I'm going to get the same set of credentials given to me. But let's say I need to take it again next week. When I go back to the event next week, I'll get a fresh set of credentials. So we have a bunch of controls we can put around the distribution of these, and it's something that's made the experience a lot better for attendees. We used to walk around, or we'd have the MCTs and people at the event would have little cards in their pocket with codes on them or passes on them, and then an attendee would raise their hand and go, hey, I need an Office 365 credential, and the MCT would run over and they'd give them the credential, and it's not the cleanest process. So now we have the ability to do it right through the UI, which is really nice. We also do have the ability, it seems to be a moving target to keep it working, but to give the user a pre-redeemed Azure subscription. So we actually take Azure promo codes, we do some trickery on them in the back end, and now the attendee gets a username and a password straight to the Azure account for them to go try. It is one of those things that's hard for us to implement because Azure is a changing product. So us keeping our processes in place to be able to constantly get that to the attendees, it's a little bit of a difficult thing. So the Azure Pass is a more tried and true method, but we do have the ability to hand out a pre-redeemed Azure subscription.
Yeah. And there are also cases where the pre-redeemed won't work.
Correct.
Due to features that you actually need the pass, you need your own account.
Yeah, and we do find weird scenarios where the content owner doesn't know the person's only getting a $50 Azure Pass, and they wrote a lab that's somewhere in Azure. They're creating a bunch of VMs that use 128 different cores across 30 VMs, and also then you can't complete the lab because they run out of money.
Yeah. What do we do in that case?
In that case, we contact the content owner and try and come up with some sort of resolution, which usually means we change the lab steps to either have less VMs or use less resources to fit within the monetary value of the pass, or we can try and get a set of passes that are just for that lab. So if this lab needs $250 to run successfully, we can get a small pool of codes to just hand out for that lab.
Yeah. So those passes, are actually worth money. So when we're handing out 1,000 passes at $50, it's not just here's a pass and go do it. And we really just use those passes because it's easier than having the attendees go in and sign up for a trial account. So just having them log on with a live ID, redeem the pass, and they're ready to go at that point. So that's really why we're using that feature. And it's also one of the things that we're analyzing after the event. How many passes did we actually hand out? Did we have enough? Did we not have enough? Normally, we never run out of passes. We did do an event in Australia a month ago, and 2 minutes before the event closed, we had 0 passes available. So in that case, we were actually able to get more passes in the last 2 minutes, but it was just enough. So it's one of those things that Quinn and I are always sitting and looking at. How many passes are we going to need? We have 250 labs. Some of them use passes, others don't. How many people are going to launch each one of those labs? So, so far, we haven't been off, so hopefully we'll keep doing it.
It's always a swag estimate to get to that number, too. So
exactly, yeah. So look at previous events, similar events, figuring out what's going on there. So after the event is over, Quinn is still working on content because the labs are still available for 6 months. So they're continuously getting updated, worked on with the content owners. So that whole life cycle of content never really finishes.
And yeah, there's a good chance that the labs running at this event are going to be used at the next event. I would say, just looking at Microsoft, 30 to 50% of any given content from one event will be rolled into the next. We could probably pull data and actually come up with a more accurate number, but just roughly out of my head, even maybe more than that, 50 to 70% of the content is probably reused.
But don't they go in and update it too then?
Well, it depends. If it's a SharePoint lab that doesn't need to be updated, they might not do it. But if it's a SharePoint Online lab that the changes have been made in the UI, then they have to make updates to it. So And that's something we work with the content owners on, and that's all worked in that content handoff schedule for the event.
Yeah, and one thing we didn't really, we keep talking about content owners, but there's really another group of people we're working with as well, and that's all the speakers for all the instructor-led labs. We have the speakers, we have the proctors, you know. Speakers are actually doing what we call online or on-site tech checks. So they're actually looking through their lab, making sure it's good for their presentation. And it might be in the ILL rooms. We've had cases where speakers have been throughout the convention center, and they just need a lab environment so they can do their demos. So we make sure that that's up and running as well, and we work with hundreds of speakers during any given event.
And even basic speaker training, and we have a lot of events where people have never even been a presenter before, so we actually have, you know, how to present sessions that we'll have where we have, you know, typically it's Kyle Rosenthal from our team. He's one of the better presenters that I've seen. He'll go tell people, you know, these are the steps you should take to have a good ILL session at your event. This is how you can be sure that people leave happy and give you good eval scores, and you get, you know, invited back to be a speaker again. So we help people that have never done this before. We help them through the process.
Yeah, and Quinn does the same type of training with all the content owners. How do they write a successful lab that they're actually going to be able to use, that can be delivered, that is not going to be a 6-hour lab and they're trying to squeeze it into like a 60-minute time slot. So we spend a lot of time teaching, coaching all of those presenters, content owners, how do they write content so they get that successful attendee experience and good evaluations, and everybody is happy, and hopefully the event will kick off again next year then. So yeah, that was really just a little bit about what we are doing for events. I know Quinn and I have been standing up here, but we have a large team of people who's working at these events. He just mentioned Kyle. Kyle couldn't be here today because he's actually at the event in Copenhagen.
Correct.
So Kyle was just in Birmingham 2 days ago, Copenhagen now.
Kyle's our Where's Waldo. He's our world traveler. He's always running a 5K on some different continent before an event for us. So,
yeah. So we keep him busy, plus a lot of other people going to all of these events.
Yeah.
So that was really it. If any of you have any questions, you know, please send us an email, reach out to us. Quinn is always available 24/7. So. By phone and email, so you can always get a hold of him.
I do encourage you to contact the help desk first, if possible, before you call me, but yes, I'm available 24/7.
Yeah, absolutely. If it's content related, always reach out to our support team first. So, but yeah, if you want to know more about events, just let us know. Thank you for joining in.
So yeah, we know there's a delay in questions, so we'll hang out for a couple minutes in case anyone has any questions to ask. And apparently we weren't that popular. I don't see anyone typing.
Nobody's there, just Phyllis.
Thanks, Phyllis.
Thanks, Phyllis.
Oh. Well, thank you.
Thank you. Why?
So it looks like it's very few people that are asking questions. So I guess we'll go ahead and end the session. If you guys have any questions about anything Kim and I just discussed, please feel free to email us. We're more than happy to go into this in detail with you. So thanks for joining us. We really appreciate it.